those are redacted. Mueller says Flynn's early cooperation was particularly valuable and gave prosecutors a roadmap for the Russia probe, and it may have prompted others to cooperate as well.
So, as Allison said, the sentencing memo was heavily redacted, heavily redacted, which means there is a lot we do not know, but also that there are investigations that are still ongoing. We've not heard a response from President Trump. Remember, he dumped all over the deal that Michael Cohen struck with the special counsel. So how does he feel about Michael Flynn providing substantial cooperation? In the meantime, it is a national day of mourning. The state funeral for President George H.W. Bush occurs today. You're still seeing live pictures from inside the Capitol Rotunda. President Bush lies in state there for about another hour. All 5 living presidents and several world leaders will join the Bush family for the memorial service at the National Cathedral. We will cover this throughout the morning. As I said, public viewing will end 1 hour from now, and then the flag draped casket will depart for the cathedral. We got a lot to cover this morning. We're going to start with the breaking news, the Michael Flynn document. Our Justice correspondent Jessica Snyder has that. Jessica.
Yeah, John, this highly anticipated memo, it was heavily redacted, but it still gave glimpses into where Mueller's investigation is headed. The special counsel saying Michael Flynn provided so much information that he should not serve any prison time. And the filing also hinted at 2 other investigations aside from the Russia probe that aren't yet public that Flynn has also assisted in. Special counsel Robert Mueller recommending that President Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn serve no jail time for lying to the FBI, citing his substantial assistance in several ongoing investigations, including Mueller's probe into Russia's interference in the 2016 election and any links or coordination between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. According to the filing, Flynn began cooperating with investigators shortly after being approached by Mueller's team, sitting for 19 interviews and handing over key documents and communications. Mueller's team arguing that Flynn's early cooperation was particularly valuable because he was one of the few people with long-term and first-hand insight into events under investigation, noting that Flynn likely inspired other witnesses to cooperate. But many crucial details about what Flynn told investigators remain unknown, since the majority of the court filing is redacted.
What I think here is Flynn provided information that is allowing Mueller to make a criminal case against someone. We don't know who that is. We can speculate or not speculate, but there's certainly somebody out there who has a criminal case that could be coming.
President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, playing down the significance of Flynn's cooperation, telling NBC News, if he had information to share with Mueller that hurt the president, you would know it by now. Flynn pleaded guilty last December to lying to the FBI about discussions he had with Russia's then ambassador to the U.S., Sergei Kislyak, during Mr. Trump's transition, including asking Kislyak not to retaliate over sanctions imposed by the Obama administration for Russia's election interference. Mueller noting that several senior members of the transition team publicly repeated this false information.
I have talked to General Flynn. None of that came up. The subject matter of sanctions or the actions taken by the Obama administration.
Was there any contact in any way between Trump or his associates and the Kremlin or cutouts they had?
Of course not. Why would there be any contacts between the campaign?
After the Washington Post reported that Flynn lied and misled the vice president, he was fired. A few days later, FBI Director James Comey has said President Trump asked him to let the investigation into Flynn go. Mr. Trump denies the allegation, but it has put Flynn at the center of a probe into whether the president obstructed justice, which gained steam after the president also fired Comey. And the next step for Michael Flynn is sentencing. That will happen on December 18th. Flynn, of course, is just one of 5 Trump associates who have pleaded guilty as part of this Russia probe. And it continues to be a jam-packed week for Mueller's team. By Friday, they'll submit a report on the extent of Michael Cohen's cooperation after his most recent guilty plea to misleading Congress. And they'll also tell a judge how Paul Manafort broke the terms of his plea deal by lying to prosecutors. So John and Allison, still a jam-packed week and a lot to come. Guys.
All right, Jessica Snyder, great to have you with us. Thanks so much. Want to bring in an august panel of CNN political and legal experts, David Gregory, Carrie Cordero, Garrick Raff, and Laura Coates. Carrie, I want to start with you. Here's what we know and what we don't know. And by that, I mean all the redacted stuff in here. But the fact that there's so much redacted may be the most significant thing here. What do you see?
I think that's right. I think the fact that so much of the information was redacted in these documents, which means that we don't actually today know exactly what Michael Flynn told the prosecutors. We know that he met with them 19 times, which is a lot of interviews. And we know that he cooperated in the special counsel's investigation. And then we also know that he cooperated in another criminal investigation.
2 others.
About which there is no other information
But
provided.
we also know the fact that it's redacted, that there's still ongoing investigations. They didn't want to tell us because they didn't want to perhaps endanger those investigations.
Right. So the reason that the information would still be redacted is because they don't want to compromise whatever are still the ongoing investigations. If there's other witnesses, if there's other pieces that they're still tracking down, they don't want to reveal that publicly. So it has to be provided under seal.
Laura, what's the headline for you?
Headline for me, of course, is that the person who chanted the lock them up, lock her up chant is actually not going to be locked up, according to what Mueller is asking for, which is not as odd as it may seem. He wasn't facing a great deal of time in the get-go. They could have charged him with multiple things. He lied, obviously, multiple times, and they chose at the outset charge him with limited cases. So we knew that was going to be the case in terms of a limited amount of scope of endangerment, but they did that no jail time. It's shocking, especially because Mueller goes to great lengths to explain that this person, because of his background, because of his record, should have been held to a higher standard. And he also says that he doesn't really buy the argument of a false memory or a feigned memory or the feigned absence of a memory. This notion of selective amnesia has haunted the administration and Michael Flynn and everyone who's come across the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. And of course, the timing of it's important here. We have the president of the United States who began every single written response answer with my recollection, best of my recall, etc. So the president is already tipped off right now that Mueller does not suffer any fools. He does not indulge fake amnesia or selective amnesia. And if there is corroboration to show that you are lying or that you should remember, they'll point it out. And finally, the one thing is the pardon dangling here. The president of the United States has been dangling a pardon for quite some time. Well, Mueller is saying, cooperate with me, and guess what? The equivalent of a pardon just happened to you.
Right. I see your pardon, and I raised you the no jail time.
Can I just say, this qualifies as a wow moment for me. I mean, in all of this, where we're looking at crumbs and pieces and shreds, and there's so much we can't speculate about. I mean, here they're saying he provided substantial assistance with regard to who in the Trump orbit may have had contact with Russians who were trying to compromise the election. I think that's a big deal. We don't know the substance of it, but there's so many pieces here that are interesting. Remember, it was Sally Yates, who was at the Justice Department, who said to the administration, look, this guy may be compromised by the Russians. We know about his dealings with the Russians at critical moments that Mueller's looking at, before the campaign, that Trump Tower meeting, other contacts around the leaking of materials by WikiLeaks, having hacked the DNC. So I think this is significant. We know that Trump said, lay off this guy, to Jim Comey, who he later fires. So, you put all of this together, it's, again, for me, a wow moment. And I think we're beginning to see something take shape here. That's the power of narrative. Mueller is going to finally do something, wherever it leads legally and politically, to put all of this together. And I think that's powerful.
Garrett Graff, you are the czar of that notion. Please explain to us what David is talking about there. And again, you keep track of the big picture here better than anyone I know. So what do you see?
Well, so what you're seeing is Mueller building a pretty methodical legal case. And as David said, sort of the challenge is we're only getting these little glimpses of it. And we're sort of seeing individual puzzle pieces without necessarily knowing what the picture is. But, we're looking at an investigation that is larger than we think it is. We're looking at an investigation that is better informed, more knowledgeable, and more insightful than we think it is. I mean, one of the things that stands out is that in every document that Bob Mueller has filed, the first one, we have been surprised by how much Bob Mueller knows. And if you begin to put that together over 17 months, it's clear Bob Mueller knows an incredible amount of information, and we don't yet know where that's all going, as David says.
Is it also clear, Carrie, that this is not wrapping up soon? That was wishful thinking for the people who thought, well, surely before the midterms, it'll be wrapped up. Well, surely before the end of the year, it'll be wrapped up. Does this all of these redactions and all of this new filing tell you, it's not wrapping up soon?
Well, I don't, soon it's hard for anybody to measure when it's going to end. I have felt like we're 7th inning-ish. Mm-hmm. That's how this has felt to me. When the Internet Research Agency and some of the hacking indictments were launched over the summer, that felt 5th inning-ish to me. So that's how I measure where we are in the case. I think certainly the Flynn documents show that there are ongoing investigations that the prosecutors are not yet willing to reveal publicly. And so that means that there's still people who potentially might be charged with things. There's still aspects of this investigation that are live and that are sensitive. That's what that tells us. On the other hand, we are seeing some of the individuals come towards their sentencing, some of the key individuals. And so as it pertains to individuals other than perhaps the implications of those closest to the president or the president, we're seeing some of those ends wrapped up.
So some parts of this investigation do appear close to being at an end, at least for these people. But Laura, I want to ask you, because one of the messages sent in this memo was that Michael Flynn cooperated early, and that was very helpful. The special counsel's memo said it was helpful in a way to corner other people and get them to testify and maybe testify honestly, to send a signal. We know what Michael Flynn has said. We know what went on here. So what did you see there?
Well, that's fine prosecution. I mean, you really want to have the cloud of secrecy and this aura of anxiety to be building. What does Michael Flynn know? Why has he been on the hook for over a year? Why is somebody who is so key in the transition period, somebody who purportedly was the very first person to tell the president, hey, Vladimir Putin called to congratulate you, and he was the first person on your presidency. The same person who is the common theme every time a Russian ambassador is mentioned, the idea of the Logan Act and the sanctions against Russia and telling Vladimir Putin not to retaliate and the president responding. What does he know? And I think that methodically, the notion that Robert Mueller operates and every prosecutor does best when people do not know what is coming next. They are incentivized to come forward, and you see this in the actual filing. Listen, the very first domino to fall is the person that makes everyone else nervous and says, well, I better go ahead first, because the first to actually squeal may get the best deal. And you're seeing right now the very first person to squeal on this issue is the person who has no jail time. Compare and contrast to Paul Manafort. Compare and contrast to perhaps Michael Cohen. And, you know, when you think about this case, especially, the anxiety is building even more. Now that you have all of the bars, all of this anxiety building about who might be next, you can imagine people are raising their hands and trying to perhaps secure the deal, because that speculative pardon no longer seems very appealing.
One of the things I think that stands out in this, that Laura sort of touched on there, is there's just the sheer amount of unrelated criminality that was going on in the Trump campaign. I mean, if you just look at the three figures this week, we sort of gloss over it in these documents with Michael Flynn. He was working as an unregistered foreign agent for the government of Turkey while serving as President Trump's campaign national security advisor. Michael Cohen, decade-long tax fraud, bank fraud that he's been charged with in addition to his campaign finance violations. Paul Manafort, campaign chairman, working on a decade-long $60 million money laundering scheme. So this is incredible leverage that Mueller is bringing to each of these people when he's sitting down talking with them, is just the sheer amount of criminal stuff they were involved in, unrelated to the criminal stuff they were doing on behalf of the Trump campaign.
And it's a reminder that people will be critical of the special prosecutor that goes in different directions. People have to understand, prosecutors prosecute crimes where they find them. That's what they do. And if they come upon them, they will make a case. The other point I think we have to see through, as most people would, Rudy Giuliani's political spin. You know, the idea that, oh, wow, all these cooperators, this is all they have. Mueller knows what he's doing. And by the way, not another new revelation to former U.S. Attorney Rudy Giuliani, who employed the same tactics. You pinch someone, if they're facing some kind of criminal charge, they might actually be pressured to tell the truth. And we know it's the truth because Mueller's not just going with anybody's testimony here. All of these are puzzle pieces that fit together in whatever the narrative is going to be. We don't know where that leads. We don't know if it leads to President Trump directly. We don't know if it leads to people directly close to him. But these are people whose testimony can be corroborated, not just, oh, well, they're lying to save their skin.
I would just add part of the reason that Michael Flynn's recommended sense that it's low, you know, that he's not going to get jail time most likely is because he was only charged with one count of making false statements to federal investigators. And so that does provide some discretion for a very low sentencing.
That's because of the special counsel basically cut a deal with him and said, we're not going to prosecute the Turkey stuff.
For all the
that was in the memo. The Turkey stuff was in the memo, but he's not pleading to that necessarily.
Panel, thank you all very much for all the insights.
All right, there are a whole lot of questions here. Coming up next, we're going to talk to someone who was there at the very beginning, the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper will talk to him about this sentencing memo. He knows Michael Flynn.
Special Counsel Robert Mueller recommending former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn get no jail time after giving what he called substantial assistance in the Russia probe. Mueller says Flynn is cooperating with at least 3 ongoing investigations, 2 of which we know nothing about. Joining us now is former Director of National Intelligence and CNN National Security Analyst James Clapper. Director, it's great to have you here with us. Of course, you know Michael Flynn. He worked for you. What did you think when you saw the headlines of what came out last night from Mueller?
Well, actually, I wasn't terribly surprised. I, like everyone else, have been torturing the filing for, glean as much meaning out of it as we can. And of course, as others have noted, most intriguing thing is what's not there, what's redacted, particularly about the ongoing investigations. And obviously the question is, well, who's that? So, but I think the leniency shown towards Mike was probably appropriate given his long military service, 5 years deployed in the war zone, and his early and frequent cooperation. So overall, not surprised.
There's a line in this memo which is particularly interesting. I want you to weigh in on. It says the defendant's extensive government service should have made him particularly aware of the harm caused by providing false information to the government, as well as the rules governing work performed on behalf of a foreign government. You've worked in government for decades. He should have known better, is what it said. Exactly,
John. And at the time, when you reach that level as a 3-star officer, you had been briefed and warned by the likes of general counsels and people like that about the do's and don'ts. And so it's quite amazing, frankly, that he engaged in, criminal activity. And that's one thing that did strike me about the filing was with all the attention focused on lying about contacts with the Russians. Well, they also misled about his engagement with Turkey. Mm-hmm. So it was much more widespread than I had previously been led to believe.
I mean, since you have been parsing this document word for word since it came out, what else have you gleaned? What do you think? How do you think this moves the narrative forward if it does?
Well, I think the combination of this document and what's not revealed in it and what's forthcoming this week with Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, it's probably not going to be a good week at the White House.
Director, if we can, the other major development over the last 24 hours is that senators were briefed by CIA Director Gina Haspel about what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. And they left that briefing fuming. I want to play some sound from some of the senators who were there.
There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. It is zero chance, zero, that this happened in such an organized fashion without the Crown Prince.
If he was in front of a jury, he would be convicted in 30 minutes guilty.
So that is so different than what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said last week, or Secretary of Defense James Mattis said. They keep on insisting, let alone the president, there's no smoking gun here, there's no direction to Jamal Khashoggi. They're saying, we just heard from the CIA director, and there is. So how can there be such a difference?
Well, first thing I'd like to do is commend Gina Haspel, because it's pretty clear to me, just from what has been said, that she did in fact abide by the writ of truth to power. And I think she laid out very straightforwardly the evidence that from intelligence sources about what happened, and obviously Mohammed bin Salman's complicity in this. So I think what the administration acolytes are doing is, using that very elastic evidentiary bar that this administration is prone to use. I guess if their smoking gun would have been, say, you interviewing Mohammed bin Salman, and he admitted publicly on live television that he directed the killing. Well, we probably didn't have that, but not too far short of that. When the intelligence community comes out, and any component of it comes out and says, they have high confidence, as I said before, you can take that to the bank. And I imagine there were multiple sources here used to put this story together, each of which the agency had high confidence. So it was a pretty compelling case, and I'm sure she laid it out.
Does this tell you why they didn't have Gina Haspel go last week? As you know, Lindsey Graham, other people were saying, why aren't we hearing from the CIA? And there was a question about why isn't the White House offering her up?
I didn't get the strategy there, because typically in any event like this, you would always have an intelligence component and a principal, in this case, Gina or Dan Coates, the DNI, as a part of the delegation. And it's clear the administration strategy was, well, if we omit intelligence, we can,
no one will notice.
Nobody will notice, and we'll marginalize the evidence. Well, that's going to come out, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they do get an all-Senate or all-House briefing on this. I think there'll be mounting pressure for that, because there have been some senators who were excluded who are not very happy about that.
Not at all. Let me play you what the president has said about this, and take that for what it is. But I also think it's more interesting in a way what the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have said out loud about this. Let's listen.
Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. They did not make that assessment. The CIA has looked at it. They've studied it a lot. They have nothing definitive. Nobody's concluded. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to conclude that the Crown Prince did it.
We have no smoking gun that the Crown Prince was involved.
There's no direct evidence linking him to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
I guess I'm most surprised to hear from Secretary Mattis. On a sliding scale, Secretary Mattis, Secretary Pompeo, and President Trump, who's a politician there. But what's the defense secretary doing there?
Well, I don't know. I wish Secretary Mattis had just remained silent about it, if nothing else, and he of all people, because he is an expert on the Mideast, and his extensive experience in the region when he was Central Command commander, and he understands the region. He understands how things operate in the region, and specifically in Saudi Arabia. So I was frankly a little taken aback by his saying that, because the intelligence evidence, even from what's publicly known, pretty compelling.
Director James Clapper, thank you very much. Great to be with you this morning.
All right, ahead on New Day, we're going to speak with Senator Marco Rubio about this CIA briefing on the Khashoggi murder. He's got a lot to say about this.
And all living presidents will join the Bush family and world leaders to honor the 41st president at his state funeral. CNN's Phil Mattingly is live on Capitol Hill with more. What do we expect, Phil?
Good morning, Allison. It's a national day of mourning. The federal government stock markets are closed, and as you noted, in just a few hours, Washington will bid its final farewell to President George H.W. Bush. Now, for the next 30 minutes, the rotunda will remain open for the public to give its final farewell to the president. Around 10 a.m., the procession with the Bush family will start over to the National Cathedral. The service should start around 11, and we've been talking about who will eulogize the president. Obviously, his son, President George W. Bush, Alan Simpson, former Senator, Brian Mulroney, former Canadian Prime Minister, and presidential historian and biographer John Meacham will also do the same. And you also talked about who will actually be in attendance. Dozens of current or former foreign leaders, dignitaries throughout Washington, but also the President's Club. Every living president will be in attendance. One of the interesting elements here, of course, is unlike perhaps past presidents, President Trump does not have a well-established relationship with many of these presidents. Hasn't spoken to President Bill Clinton, hasn't spoken to President Jimmy Carter, hasn't spoken to President Obama, we're told, since the inauguration, has shared a few phone calls with President George W. Bush, and of course that visit at the Blair House yesterday, where the president came across the street from the White House to meet with the Bush family. Also met at the White House with Laura Bush when she was meeting with the First Lady. Also, I do want to track back. We're going to be talking a lot about what's happening today and what happens tomorrow when the president travels back to Texas. What happened last night in the rotunda? We've been talking about the public viewing. Two really kind of organic moments that kind of caught everybody's attention. The first is President George W. Bush, Jeb Bush, Laura Bush actually returning unannounced to the rotunda, not with any particular motive except for to greet those who have been waiting in line for hours, to shake their hands, to give hugs. At one point, President George W. Bush was holding a baby, kind of almost like a political candidate, but thanking those for coming to pay their respects to their father. And the second one, and that was Senator Bob Dole, obviously well known throughout the country, former presidential candidate, somebody who was grievously wounded himself in World War II, has obviously suffered those injuries and is also dealing with issues now in old age, being helped up and giving a final salute to President George H.W. Bush, once a political opponent, then a political ally. I can't think of a more noteworthy picture than that you're looking at right now. John?
World War II Lieutenant Bob Dole saluting World War II Lieutenant George H.W. Bush, two heroes who gave their lives, dedicated their lives to service to this country. Phil Mattingly, great to have you with us. Bumped into Phil at the Capitol yesterday. It was great to see you there. Thanks so much, Phil.
That was a really heartrending moment.
It really was. Look, there's a lifetime of history between Bob Dole and George H.W. Bush, too. They spent as much time as rivals as they did friends, but that was a moment.
Special report, a deadly haze inside the fraternity crisis, Saturday night, 8 Eastern.
In just hours now, President Trump, all former living presidents, world leaders in the Bush family will honor President George H.W. Bush at a state funeral at the Washington Cathedral. We're back with David Gregory and now joined by CNN presidential historian Douglas Brinkley and Frank Sesno, the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University and former CNN Washington bureau chief. And Frank, I want to start with you. As we see the former presidents there today, we've noted maybe it'll be an awkward gathering, but the fact that they are all there together is actually a reflection of George H.W. Bush.
It is who he was, what he stood for, which is to bring people together across the aisle. It also is a reflection of that there's a lot asked of presidents. You play a lot of different roles. You're consoler-in-chief, commander-in-chief, convener-in-chief, all those things. And this is one of those rare moments around the death of a former president where these different eras come together in the persons of the people who led us through them. And you will compare and contrast naturally the styles and the experiences of these different people. Bill Clinton, what he had and the scandals that he confronted. Jimmy Carter and the life that he's led since he was president. And George H.W. Bush. I was reflecting and going through some things and how he brought these people together and looking at the different places, the incredible trajectory he had when he was taking us up to the invasion of Kuwait to push the Iraqis out, because I was with him then. And he traveled the world meeting with so many of these people. And what we saw from Dole yesterday and what you're seeing today, what you're talking about now, is sort of the expression of that, of bringing all these people whom he knew, we worked with, back together around him one last time.
Doug, normally a sitting president would give the eulogy, but Donald Trump will not do that for a host of reasons. And I thought it was so gracious of Jeb Bush, who, of course, President Trump has gone after and called names. He gave him a pass, basically. He said, he was very gracious, I felt. So listen to this. He says, what people want to talk about is, well, why isn't the president giving the eulogy? It's because we have a unique circumstance here. My brother was president, so I'm sorry.
Well, look, we all know there's no love lost between the Trumps and the Bushes, but in typical Bush 41 fashion, he always was about the institution of the presidency. And so it's only natural that he's going to have Donald Trump there. But if Donald Trump was one of the principal eulogists, they could have had a bit of a circus atmosphere to it. So I think it's working out very nicely. He's going to be there. We'll have 5 presidents there. You know, when Richard Nixon died in 1994, there were 5. And, the word Watergate was never mentioned in 1994. I don't think you're going to hear about Willie Horton today. That it's just a moment where our country is going to pull behind the World War II legacy of 41. But also, what a Cold Warrior he was. He fought the Cold War every way he could, from CIA, UN envoy on down.
Lech Walesa going to be there.
Yes, that's
which
very
is remarkable, right? I mean, that's just so interesting. You're having this moment in history inside this building that spans decades and decades. You know, David Gregory, I was struck last night, the picture of President Trump and George W. Bush meeting at Blair House there. The Bush family, I think, has gone out of its way to diffuse this, to take the air out of whatever tension there may have been, because they don't want that to be part of today. And I'm hoping and I'm expecting that all the living presidents will rise to this occasion when they're there in that pew in the front row.
Oh, I think there's no question that they will. The Bush family, made more than amends with Bill Clinton. George H.W. Bush became so close with the former president and all their work in response to disaster relief. And I just don't think the Bush family wanted any kind of distraction with President Trump. And I think that's really out of deference to their father. I mean, George W. Bush is a little more fiery like his mother. He may not forget as much. But I think they all wanted to make the most appropriate statement possible. And I think, for me, what I'll really be looking for is focused on George W. Bush, because, all of us, when we watch our public figures, we see a little bit of ourselves in those relationships, father and son. Not that I can imagine what it's like to be a president or have a father as a president, but you can understand struggling with your father when you're younger and trying to live up to him and dealing with expectations. And then for George W. Bush, who was president, to have had so much expectation, so much pressure about the father, but still have so much love between them when George W. Bush, went through the very difficult moments of his presidency is something that I think we'll hear a lot about today.
I think we're going to see the love is what we're going to see. Almost more than the history from George W. Bush.
And Frank, as John can tell you, I love body language, and we're going to have a lot of it. We're going to have a lot of it. I can't help. I mean, obviously, of course, this is about Bush 41 today, but I can't help watching, or when I will watch, what the body language will be between President Obama and Michelle Obama and Donald Trump and Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and all of that. I mean, that's just going to be there, whether we like it or not today. Of course, there is tension because of what these past 3 years have been like.
I'd be surprised, though, if we see too much of that. I mean, I think the focus is going to be so much on that family and that casket and that man and what he stood for. I think it'll be fascinating to watch Donald Trump and see what he does because he's so unconventional and it's entirely possible. But those other presidents have been through this before. They've been, as I mentioned, the grievers in chief. And they also create, there's a very special club that happens among former presidents when they get out. They have all been through this incredibly intense 24/7 nonstop experience, right? Crucible. And so to come and to remember someone like this, and it's more poignant because of where our politics are now. Sure. It's absolutely more poignant. We are grieving not only the passage of a man, but the passage of a time.
Jimmy Carter, I bet, will be put in the middle. Here's betting that Jimmy Carter is somehow Switzerland in the pew there. We'll wait and see if that happens.
Also, Trump wants to be part of this club. He wants to be embraced.
They may change the membership rules by the time he gets there. Look, here's what I want to do. If we can put the picture up of Bob Dole again, because I want to see this one more time. And we'll have this picture up as we go to break. Thank you all for this discussion. CNN's special coverage of President George H.W. Bush's state funeral begins at 9 a.m. with Wolf Blitzer, Jake Tapper, and Anderson Cooper.